It's very closely tied to this notion of sustainability, which means creating economic and social and environmental values.
My name is Madelyn, and I am the Marketing and Sales Manager here at EFI. Today, we are going to talk about corporate social responsibility, and we have the great pleasure of sitting down with not one, but two very special guests today in today's Fireside Chat. First, we have Lilian, who is EFI's Senior Facilitator, and she works on our workforce development team. She trains labor management leadership teams in workplace collaboration and problem-solving skills. And she also supports ongoing learning and communication among workers, managers, growers, and EFI. Secondly, we have LeAnne, who is our Director of Marketing and Communications. She oversees our strategic brand and communication efforts, working closely with partners on marketing efforts and bringing greater awareness to EFI's impact in the produce industry and consumers. All right, I'm just going to kick it right off. LeAnne, this first question is directed towards you. How are you seeing consumers thinking about corporate social responsibility?
Yeah, first let's maybe talk about what corporate social responsibility is.
Sure.
And it's the idea that a corporation should be socially accountable and look to bring more benefit than just driving profits for its shareholders, ensuring that its actions benefit the broader community as well as earning money. And one way that I really like to think about it is how we often talk about sustainability initiatives, the idea that decisions should be made that balance profit, people, and planet. And so while many companies have included things like philanthropy and community service into their operations for a really long time, and companies like Johnson & Johnson and Hershey even started defining the early parts of corporate social responsibility back in the 1940s.
That's crazy.
CSR, as we know it today, really started to take hold in the 1970s. And as these more recent generations, Gen Y and Gen Z, have come about, they have much greater demands on a values forward approach from corporations, right? That's not a surprise. Each year, there's numerous consumer studies that are done, and the data just grows and strengthens and is more diverse in terms of what consumers say that they want from brands and corporations. They want to know that they're doing good work. They want to know that they're taking care of people and the planet. And more of them are saying, hey, I'm going to be loyal to your company when I know that I can trust what you're doing behind the scenes. They also tell us that they're boycotting brands, right? Or sharing information with their friends and family. And sometimes that's negatively impacting purchase and sometimes positively. So if I tell you, hey, there's this great company and you should buy your tea there because they're doing such great work on the social responsibility side, a lot of that is happening more and more. Yeah. And I always like now to think of things, especially around consumer trends before the pandemic and after the pandemic. And I would say that the pandemic did nothing but reinforce this trend. You know, many consumers hadn't thought about supply chains, not really cared about how products actually showed up in the store on shelves. And they didn't understand sort of that invisible work that all the people who were making those processes appear seamless. But the pandemic literally defined essential workers for us, right? And now consumers want to know that the products and the services that they buy are taking care of those essential workers. So for me, the lesson in this to companies is that you need to examine your values. You need to ensure those values are being held up across your operations. You need to think not only about the people who work directly for you, but also those who are in your supply chain or maybe living in the communities where the products are produced. And then you need to be able to credibly share with consumers what all that looks like behind the scenes and how you're continuing to make improvements. No one's expected to be perfect, right? It's just a matter of setting the bar and continuing to get better. And, as a company, if you're not feeling the pressure directly from consumers or maybe investors at this point, you will likely start to see an uptick in retailer requirements. Maybe they're asking for third-party certifications or other kind of verifications of policies and processes, because retailers are hearing these growing concerns from consumers.
Yeah.
And so they're doing their own work, on their CSR, and then making sure that they're shoring up their supply chains.
Yeah. That circular relationship. So kind of on the flip side of that, and a little closer to home, what is corporate or social responsibility looking like in the fresh produce industry right now?
Yeah. I mean, here at EFI, we really believe that 2014 was a watershed moment for the fresh produce industry. That was the year that the LA Times ran an expose that detailed some really terrible conditions on fresh produce farms throughout Mexico.
Yeah.
And the industry responded by coming together, and they created guiding principles and a framework by which farming operations should be measured. It's called the Ethical Charter on Responsible Labor Practices. And it covers things like human rights, and it lists all the things that fresh produce farms should be following. They want to ensure that all labor laws are being followed. But more importantly, this is sort of the sweet spot of EFI. There's a whole section in the charter around professional conduct, and it details out what communication and worker involvement and management systems should look like. We also are seeing, and I think this is definite for fresh produce. We've seen it happen in other industries like textiles in the past, but now retailers are really starting to add new standards and requirements around numerous of these areas. We all know and talk about on a very regular basis food safety, but we're also starting to see retailers set strict standards for things like working conditions, responsible recruitment of workers, sustainability efforts, and even pollinator health are some of the more recent ones. So yeah, retailers are setting these kinds of standards so that they can be responsive to all the things we just talked about with the consumer.
So moving on from those two perspectives a little bit and passing the mic over to Lilian. Lilian, can you speak about what corporate social responsibility looks like at a farming operation and how EFI kind of takes the operation from intent to actual impact?
And just to start, I would like to echo, what LeAnne's definition of corporate social responsibility and how it's very closely tied to this notion of sustainability, which means creating economic and social and environmental values. So all of those non-financial factors that companies need to consider when making business decisions. And those decisions and those actions can take place at the level of the workplace or beyond. And so starting with the workplace, so in a central part of the EFI certification program is this piece of the standards that talks about labor management cooperation. And that's really embodied in what we call the leadership team, which is a team of people that represents the entire workforce in terms of their job functions, the level of the company in which they work, their demographics, and the role of the team is to understand the EFI program and standards, facilitate communication and collaboration across the company and with the rest of the workforce, and to help address problems and make improvements that can affect compliance with the certification and in general by bringing in the ideas and the voices of people from across the operation. And so a big part of my job has been to go to farming operations and help to train these very diverse teams. And So I would say that by requiring farming operations to have trained leadership teams that are an integral part of the compliance and continuous improvement in the operation, EFI certification helps companies to build structures and mechanisms for worker voice and labor management collaboration that can lead to real long-term culture change for the organization that benefits both the company and the workforce. The company, right? The company gains from being able to access the on-the-ground perspectives and experience of its employees, and employees gain by feeling, right, that their knowledge and ideas are heard and are respected and are valued, which in turn makes them feel more loyal and connected to the company and more likely to speak up if there's a problem. And so, and that same mechanism, that same model can be applied to other areas, other endeavors, right, beyond EFI certification. If your company wants to start a waste reduction program or a pesticide reduction program or a food donation program, right, which could benefit your surrounding community, your surrounding environment, it will likely be strengthened by a culture of collaboration and corporate social responsibility at all levels of the company.
That corporate responsibility, social responsibility, I think LeAnne kicked us off by saying people, profit, and planet, right? So we're giving these tools to really enable that. Final question, and this is my favorite question, and LeAnne, I'll kick it to you, and then Lilian take over. Do you have any success stories or highlighted stories you'd like to share around this topic?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, so one way that I like to think about corporate social responsibility is how ethics and integrity play into it. You know, that idea of like, what's happening when no one is looking, when there's not an auditor on the farm with a clipboard. And so I loved that Lilian talked about culture change, because one of our growers has this really phenomenal story, how they thought they were doing everything right. They were checking in with workers, they were doing small groups and one-on-one and just asking, you know, is everything going okay? What can we do to make things better? And they always heard, things are good. Things are good. And then they introduced what Lilian just described, EFI training, built a leadership team, and slowly that culture did change, and more trust grew and more respect grew. And then suddenly there were these murmurings. Well, maybe not everything was quite as okay as people were initially saying. And the idea that women were feeling safe and in a trusted environment, they came forward and they said, you know, there's all these things that are happening that would very squarely fall into the definition of sexual harassment. And the company, you know, did all the right things. They had to make some hard decisions. They had to make some management changes and part ways with people. They did all sorts of training and really communicated a zero tolerance. And so to me, you know, that is the perfect example of we could have just left well all enough alone, you know, and people were saying things were good. But when you really enable the workforce to identify and have a place to bring these kinds of issues and build trust and respect, and when an employee says something, to act on it, that builds so much trust that they're going to continue to come back. So I love that as a case study. It just, I think, really goes to the heart of what EFI is trying to do.
Actual movement. Lilian?
Well, I want to pick up on what you alluded to, Madelyn, which is that thinking about things in terms of people and planet and profit, you know, those three can really reinforce each other. So we know that at some of our most committed long-term EFI partner companies, where worker manager teams are an integral part of how they run their operations day to day, there have been important that model, that approach has led to important changes and improvements that arose from the workforce. For example, suggestions for better, more effective, or more efficient tools or equipment, better ways of organizing work processes. And we also know that some of our partners are now going beyond the EFI certification program and creating waste reduction programs, which not only benefit the workplace and the environment, but really rely on and draw on an informed and engaged workforce that cares deeply about the future of the world that they live in, that their children have to live in, and wants to have a positive impact on the environment.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to say, I feel like we have redefined like CSR, at least in my mind, and maybe the best corporate social responsibility is when you have those reinforcing cycles, when you're doing the right thing and then you're giving trust and agency to your workers who are then helping drive your profit. And then tying in planet would be the epitome. Lilian, I'm going to use this definition from now on.
Creating new definitions here and giving the autonomy to the workers and to come up with efficiencies that sometimes are so simple. Some of these stories I hear are not overhauls, but they save time and money and are huge efficiencies in the end, which is pretty awesome. Well, that wraps up my rapid fire questions for you two around corporate social responsibility, which is one of those slippery things to define. If you are watching this and are interested in getting started with Equitable Food Initiative, EFI, my contact will be coming up here on the screen shortly. Shoot me an email. We can send you down the path, and maybe your operation can have a wonderfully engaged leadership team to come up with all kinds of efficiencies and CSR on your operation. Lilian and LeAnne, thanks so much for coming.